Dear colleagues, Ministry of Defense spokesperson Mr. Vilyen Pidgornyy will speak on Russian military aggression in eastern Ukraine. Mr. Pidgornyy, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me give you a weekly update on the Russian aggression against Ukraine between January 16th and 22nd. The previous week was marked with hostilities of low and middle intensity all across the front line. Russia-backed militants reduced the number of heavy weapons used in all three sectors. In addition, not a single artillery action by proxy forces was recorded during the last week. At the same time, enemy snipers were active almost every day throughout last week. Overall, 12 cases of enemy ceasefire violations with sniper fire were recorded in the anti-terrorist operation area last week. The number of ceasefire violations ranged between 61 on Tuesday, January 17th, at the highest point, and 19 on Thursday, January 19th, at the lowest. In the Luhansk sector, all enemy fire attacks against Ukrainian armed forces took place in Popasna and Stanitsa Luhanska districts. Additionally, the militants used mortars in Popasna district. The heaviest enemy fire in this area took place on Tuesday and Wednesday, January 17th and 18th respectively. During those 2 days, the militants fired at Ukrainian positions over 60 mortar bombs in total. The Donetsk sector, the militants significantly reduced their combat activity. Major hostilities remained in Avdiivka industrial area, where enemy fire against Ukrainian armed forces lasted from 1 to 5 hours on a daily basis. Mortars were used there by the enemy only on Monday, January 16th. Occasionally, during the week, Russian proxies violated ceasefire regime at Svetlodarsk without using heavy weapons. Other enemy violations of a truce in the Donetsk sector took place at the occupied Horlivka perimeter and areas close to the Donetsk airport. There, the enemy used heavy weapons only once, having shelled positions of Ukrainian troops near the village of Pisky with 82mm mortars yesterday, January 22nd. In the Mariupol sector, military confrontation took place in Marinka-Krasnohorivka area and in the frontline area close to the Azov Sea. The vast majority of fire episodes by the enemy took place in the southern coastal part of the sector. Ukrainian positions in Hnutove, Vodyane, and Shirokine were shelled by the enemy regularly day after day. 80% of all attacks in the Mariupol sector accounted mainly for these spots, where Russian proxies largely used small arms and occasionally mortars. Most intensive enemy shelling of Ukrainian positions occurred on January 18th near Talakivka. Throughout 30 minutes, militants fired at Ukrainian troops about 30 mortar bombs of 82 caliber. Over the week, Ukrainian troops registered 13 episodes of enemy drones performing aerial reconnaissance in the anti-terrorist operation zone. Ukrainian military intelligence confirmed areas of UAVs launches. Adjacent area of Shastya Slavyanoserbsk, Luhansk village at Svetlodarsk area, Orlivka perimeter, territory to the west of Donetsk and Shirokine. Ukraine's military intelligence reports of the ongoing military assistance of Moscow to its proxies. Russia has delivered 4 train echelons with an unidentified cargo to occupied Luhansk, Rovenki, and Ilovaisk. Additionally, Russia has delivered more fuel to its proxy forces. 2 truck convoys that consisted of fuel tankers crossed Russia-Ukrainian border at checkpoints controlled by the militants, namely Uspenka and Novazovsk. As per intelligence reports, the total number of casualties amongst Russian proxies is 14 killed and 23 wounded. Also, Ukrainian military intelligence officers reported that Russian occupational forces had rebranded the Melton's units. In order to simulate the execution of the Minsk agreements and continue the policy of disguising the presence of Russian armed forces in Donbass, names of the so-called 1st and 2nd Army Corps units were revised. For your information, these are some of them. The so-called 2nd Separate Motor Rifle Brigade changed its name to the so-called 2nd Separate Platoon of People's Militia of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic, deployed in Luhansk. The so-called 4th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade changed its name to the so-called 4th Separate Platoon of People's Militia of the so-called LPR, place of deployment Perevalsk, Luhansk region. The so-called 7th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade changed its name to the so-called 7th Separate Platoon of People's Militia of the so-called LPR, deployed in Bryanka, Luhansk region. The so-called 6th Separate Motor Rifle Regiment changed its name to the so-called 6th Separate Platoon of People's Militia of the so-called LPR, also known as Platov. The so-called 4th Separate Tank Battalion, Avgust, changed its name to the so-called Operational Mechanized Group Panzer. The so-called Separate UAV Squadron changed its name to the so-called Operational Group Sokol. The so-called 11th Separate Mechanized Regiment changed its name to the so-called Separate Platoon of People's Militia of the so-called LPR, also known as Dunai. On January 18th, in the Mariupol sector, Ukrainian servicemen detained a Russian citizen. He was a member of Russian occupational forces. Detained Yevgeny Shatalov told Ukrainian law enforcers about the structure of the militants' gangs and about constant discipline violations in the ranks of the militants. Also, the detainee reported about multiple refusals to extend military so-called contracts among militants due to constant non-payment of the so-called salaries to them. On January 19th, the Security Service of Ukraine officers examined armaments samples left by the militants during their retreat from the battlefield after their unsuccessful assault attempt on January 13th. Ukrainian military experts confirmed that a warhead for rocket launcher they found was developed by the Russian primary weapons manufacturing company Basalt. Last week, one Ukrainian serviceman was killed in action, and 8 servicemen were wounded in action. This includes 2 wounded as a result of booby trap explosion. Our hearts go out to the families and friends of the fallen Ukrainian hero. On Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, Ukrainian armed forces did not incur any casualties. On January 17th, a civilian was killed as a result of militant shelling of residential areas of Zolote. In addition, on January 20th, militants shelled a bus near Olenivka, which is temporarily occupied by the militants' territory of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. As a result of shelling, a local woman was injured. 2 private homes were damaged as a result of militants' attacks in Pivdenny village and Avdiivka, which are in the Donetsk sector. In addition to this, infrastructure damages to the militants' fire attacks included farm household premises in recently liberated Novoluhansk village, gas pipeline in Luhansk and Svetlodarsk, and 10 power supply facilities in several localities in the Donetsk region. That'll be all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pidgornyy. Looking forward to seeing you here next Monday.